American English team. My name is Heather Benucci, also known as Moderator Heather, and I'm very happy to introduce today's webinar. I'd like to say a big welcome to all of you who've joined us before, and welcome any new teachers who are joining us for the first time. Here you can see the remaining sessions in Course 13. As you can see, we still have 2 great topics to look forward to. I think most of you know the answer to this question, as this is the 4th webinar in this series. You can participate in the webinars through the chat box. As you know, you will hear but not see the presenter, but the chat box is where you can ask questions or make comments related to today's topic. Of course, not every question will be answered during the session, as there are often hundreds of awesome teachers participating. However, there is another place to ask questions, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Your presenter will also ask you questions in the form of polls. These are multiple choice questions, and they will appear on the screen for you to answer. Unfortunately, some people may experience technical problems, and we cannot fix individual technical issues. However, we will let you know if we're having a global technical problem. If you do lose sound, a great way to follow along is to use the caption pod that you can see at the bottom of the screen. Each webinar course consists of 6 webinars, and during the course, webinars take place every other Wednesday. If you attend at least 4 of 6 webinars, you'll receive an e-certificate from your regional English language officer or local U.S. embassy. To ensure you're eligible for that e-certificate, we will ask you to submit attendance information at the very, very, very end of the webinar. Please do not submit it before we request it, or your information will not be counted. For individuals, meaning you are participating alone at your own computer, we'll just need your email address as shown. For viewing hosts, meaning there is a group of teachers watching the webinar together in the same room, we will only need the host's email address and the total number of participants, as you can see in the second example. All right, for where to share those questions that we can't answer during the live session today. The Ning. Most of you are familiar at this point with our Ning site, but if you haven't registered yet, please do join us. It's a great way to continue discussions about each webinar topic, to interact with your colleagues from around the world, and to get access to additional teaching resources. We post the pre-webinar resources, questions before each webinar, and we also post the recordings, PowerPoints, and additional resources after each session. Hope many of you have already participated in Katie's very interesting discussion related to this webinar. And finally, we encourage you all to visit our website, americanenglish.state.gov, where we have a wide range of resources available for teachers and learners of English. And this site is home to the free short story resources that we're going to talk about today. And on to today. Many of us are familiar with the valuable moral of O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi, but what about the other kinds of lessons that can be drawn from this treasured story? And what can be learned from some more of O. Henry's wonderful stories? Today, we are going to explore ways to help students learn language, culture, and those important morals too, through a collection of O. Henry's most famous short stories. Using text and audio formats, we're going to explore suggested classroom activities focused on reading strategies and literary devices, debate and discussion, vocabulary and cultural themes, and again, all of these resources are going to be available for free from the American English website. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Katie Ryan. Katie is a programs manager at the University of Pennsylvania's English language programs, where she teaches in or coordinates programs in English for general, academic, and professional purposes. Her teaching interests include literacy, intelligibility, and vocabulary instruction. Katie's career as an English language educator began at a secondary school in Bangkok, Thailand, and has also included work as a materials writer and editor for the Office of English Language Programs at the U.S. Department of State. Katie holds an MA in TESOL from the American University and a BA in Communication with a specialization in journalism from Loyola University in Maryland. And without further ado, I say a big welcome to Katie. Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in your day. I hope it's a good time. Great to see you all here. I've been really looking forward to our session today, especially since we've already had some really interesting discussions on the Ning, and I think we're just going to explore even more interesting concepts related to using audiobooks and short stories, and specifically O. Henry today in our webinar. So we've got a lot to cover today, so we should just go ahead and get started. So what exactly are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to start by looking at short stories. We'll look at genre in general, with first at the short story and why it might be a useful learning tool for our students, and then at audiobooks and how that format can enrich our lessons. And we'll get to know O. Henry and his writing a little bit better. And finally, we'll get to the real point of this webinar and look at some kind of practical ways that you can utilize the free materials available at americanenglish.state.gov in your classroom. And some of these activities are also adaptable for use with other texts and other kinds of skills work. So I hope you'll find them really versatile and really useful. So let's begin with short stories. Why might we use short stories in our class? Well, first let's head to the polls so that we can get some information about your learners and their needs, their abilities, their interests. I have just a couple of questions for you here. First, I'll ask you to just think specifically, or think generally at first, and later I'll ask you specifically about O. Henry's short stories. So as we answer these questions, just think it in general terms. So which genre or form of text are your students most likely to enjoy? Novels, short stories, poetry, essays? I hope these are honest answers. I know that today's webinar focuses on short stories. I'm glad to see that you think students are really interested in enjoying those. And I'm curious to know why. So maybe we'll share some reasons why in the chat box in a little bit. Okay, so it looks like most people are really interested in, your students are really interested in short stories. That's great. All right, let's move to the next poll. Which student group do you believe short stories are appropriate for? Now, remember, we're talking about short stories in general. It doesn't have to be one by O. Henry. It doesn't have to be one that you read on americanenglish.state.gov. But which student group do you think short stories are appropriate for? And maybe it could be more than one. Kindergartners, I'm using the language that we use to describe the grades in K through 12, elementary school through secondary school here in the U.S., but I've also listed the ages here so that you can understand a little bit better. So it looks like most of us think that short stories are appropriate for 6th to 8th graders, ages 11 to 13, but that we do see some possibility for students at different age groups and to be able to benefit from short stories. I think it's interesting that we think adults might benefit the least from short stories. But actually, all of those simplified readers that you may have previewed, I hope, before our session, were probably written originally for an adult audience. And I know that as a college student studying fiction, I read a lot of short stories in my writing classes, and they were really useful to me. So as a university student, I enjoyed them, and I still read them today. So I think depending on the content, the language that's used, the themes that are addressed, and the complexity of the sentences, short stories could be appropriate for all of these audiences. So let's move to the next poll then. Okay, so what language proficiency level do your learners need to achieve in order to learn effectively from a short story? So I see, I'm using some language that comes from the American Council of Foreign Language Teachers. These are the descriptions that they use to describe their levels. So we're talking about the very first language proficiency level your learners need to achieve. So what do you think is the lowest level that a student should be at in order to answer the question, or to read from a short story, learn from a short story? So I'm interested that a lot of us have said novice low, and I think maybe if you take a look at some of the suggested resources that are going to be posted on the Ning after this session, you will see that there are some really interesting short stories written for very, very beginning students, and even a chance for your students to write their own short stories at the very beginning level. So yeah, I think that's great. Okay, let's move on to, let's see. Sorry, let's go back to the poll, or to the slideshow. Thank you, Heather. Short stories, like any interesting text, can be great discussion starters. Okay, they offer us insights into history and contemporary issues, culture, politics. They often teach us important life lessons, or maybe the author is wrestling, or the characters are wrestling with difficult issues that can lead to lively and enriching debates in our classes. And as we'll see a little later, O. Henry really raises a lot of questions for discussion in his short stories in the American English collection. And maybe you're already thinking now about some of the questions or themes that you could use to start discussions based on the pre-reading that you did. Another benefit of short stories is that they're really versatile. Obviously, they can provide content to explore in speaking assignments like we just mentioned, or writing assignments too, but they can also be a source for lessons on vocabulary and grammar, since they provide us with contextualized examples of target words or structures. That means our target vocabulary is used in a real sentence. Our target grammar is used in a real sentence, not one that we've created to help our language learners. And so we'll come to learn in a minute, too, how short stories can even help students learn pronunciation. So like novels, they allow students to explore literary concepts like setting, plot, and character development. But maybe, unlike some novels, they're really easily approachable in terms of length. Short stories can be covered in 1 or 2 class sessions, and they're also less complex and tend to be focused on like a single plot line, not incorporating subplots or lots of minor characters that can be confusing to developing readers. And so short stories luckily contain many of the same elements of a novel and literary devices and narrative elements that we want our readers to explore. So learners can start to look at concepts like plot and character development, or figurative language like metaphors and symbolism, or maybe even allegory, where characters represent kind of a human trait like greed or love, and so on. So for that reason, short stories are wonderful developmental tools. And as you all may have noticed when you were thinking about which genre your students like the best, short stories can perhaps be less anxiety-inducing than novels because they're shorter and simpler. They're also more concrete than poetry. In other words, they're less abstract than poetry. So for some readers, short stories might also be more enjoyable than poetry. And since they help students exercise their imaginations, for some they might be more entertaining than news articles or essays. So those are some of the ideas that I had about why short stories might be beneficial for us to explore in our classroom. And we can take a minute to share some of the things that have come to your mind. So what other benefits do you believe can be drawn from using short stories in the class? I like how Alina says that they can catch attention of younger ones. Yeah, a lot of times short stories have great pictures that go along with them that can be entertaining and motivating for students. because they're shorter, maybe they're easy to remember or to retain. I think that's maybe what you're explaining, Yendo. The vocabulary, yeah, it's a great source for vocabulary, and a lot of times key vocabulary terms are repeated in a short story, which gives our students multiple exposure to those words. They're great for role plays, that's right. Petya, thank you for that example. A lot of times they have content that students can relate to, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Rebecca, thank you for adding that idea. We're going to talk about ways to make stories more memorable by having our students try and relate to them. Great, so you all are sharing some really wonderful ideas, and I hope that maybe that will help inform how you will explore these short stories in your class. Now, the wonderful people at the Office of English Language Programs have done their best to offer you and your learners some variety. So when you go to the American English website, you can find O. Henry's short stories and others by Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe, Jack London, and so on, in both text and audio format. And many of you have already begun exploring what is available there. So there are benefits, of course, to using both of these, each of these versions, each of these formats. But let's talk about why you might want to use the audio version for a minute. Well, for one thing, they're free, right? So not all audiobooks come at no charge, but you can find several on the American English site. And on the Ning afterwards, there will be a list of websites where you can find even more. Additionally, they're portable. So students can listen while they're doing other things. They can enjoy audiobooks on family road trips or while commuting to work or school. And audiobooks are entertaining, which can help students develop a love of reading. You know, if they're doing this in their free time while they're doing other things, then they might come to really love stories and then maybe venture into reading the actual text later. So a lot of the skills, too, that go along with reading, like creative and critical thinking, are exercised when students learn with audiobooks. So it benefits their reading, it enhances their reading skills sometimes, too. Another benefit is that audiobooks could be a way for a student to step up from his or her current reading level without being overwhelmed. So some of our students, as I'm sure you know, have a stronger listening than reading skills. And these students can push themselves, or we can, encourage them to explore longer and more complex text in audio form. So they could use an audiobook to learn more about organizational patterns, or to develop their vocabulary, and their critical thinking, and their knowledge of literary devices while they're using an audiobook, which will enhance their reading skills as well. So I think audiobooks are really, really great. Let's see if you all can come up with some other benefits of audiobooks as language teaching tools. And you can think back to Jennifer Hodgson's webinar, moderator Jenny's webinar, or you can come up with your own ideas and share them in the chat box. Maybe some of you previewed moderator Jenny's webinar from, I think it was the sixth webinar series in the Shaping the Way We Teach English webinar program. Oh, sorry. Jenny's corrected me. It's 7.3. So, and you can find it on the name. You can find a link to that too. So I see you're saying listening is essential for learning language. Good. Oh, I see many of you are talking about pronunciation, and we're going to look at some of those reasons too, those benefits in just a minute. So yeah, some students prefer listening to reading. That's true. Oh, and we're looking at intonation, listening skill, imagination. Some students can understand listening more than reading, so these are all really great ideas. So all of your ideas and mine illustrate how audiobooks can be a useful scaffold for our language learners. So in the picture here, you see a scaffold. That's what that structure is that these construction workers are standing on to help them with their building project. And our students are building their language in a similar way. So a scaffold, like an audiobook, and the questions that we ask our students to answer and relate to the audiobook provide support to help our students build their language skills. And audiobooks provide support that our students need to develop fluency as a reader. So fluent reading is kind of like driving on a smooth road. It's easy, it's uninterrupted. I don't see any stop signs on this road, right? It's not full of bumps and starts, but it's curvy and it's expressive. So in some places you might go a little faster, you might go a little slower, depending on the idea that's being discussed in the story. So how do audiobooks help students develop this skill, this fluent reading skill? Well, one way is by unlocking the sounds of new words for students. So English is not always spelled the way it sounds, and this can be a challenge. I'm sure you all have experienced the challenge of sounding out a word in English based on its spelling that doesn't seem reasonable. And that's why we, as linguists, have to use this special alphabet to explain in writing exactly how to pronounce words. So maybe you know what word this is. That's right, Ozma, phonetics. This is the word phonetics written in the International Phonetic Alphabet. Even advanced readers sometimes encounter words that they don't know how to pronounce, and native speakers do this too. Like my brother, Aiden, is a really good example. I always chuckle when I hear him pronounce a word kind of funny because I know he's only seen it in writing. He reads constantly, and so he's seen that word in writing and he hasn't heard it. And he does that pretty frequently. It's pretty funny. So maybe I should tell him to give audiobooks a chance. But anyway, our readers might need help with less frequently used words or names of Okay, everyone, can you hear me now? I'm so sorry about that technical difficulty. Okay, great. Okay, all right. So you can, don't worry about saying yes now because we all can hear me. So let's not delay the chat box too much. So we're all back together, and let's just move on with the webinar. Okay. So I started to say that our advanced learners need some help. Sometimes understanding the names of less frequently used words or names of people and places. So let's take the name of my city as an example. Maybe I already mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, so let's test your listening here. But let's take the name of my city as an example. So do you know what city is pictured here? Maybe you can remember from the introduction. I'm not sure. Oh, it looks like folks are not quite on target here. It's not New York. It's not New York. No, it is in the U.S. It's in the East Coast. It's not Maryland, although I am from Maryland originally. It's not Seattle. It's not Bangkok. This is another East Coast city in America. This is Philadelphia. That's right, Aaliyah. Great. Yes. So maybe the F sound from a PH spelling is easily recognizable and not too hard for your learners to sound out. And maybe they're really familiar with this kind of pronunciation rule, but maybe they could look at this word and say Philadelphia really easily without knowing how locals pronounce this word. So do you know how this word might sound in fast casual speech? Yeah, so the nickname is Philly, but even when locals are pronouncing the full name of the city, they say it a little bit differently. We sometimes say Fluffia. I'm from Fluffia, Pennsylvania. So instead of saying Philadelphia very clearly, we might pronounce it in this reduced form. And so, meaning we take out some of the syllables. So by reading along while a story is read by an actor using the local dialect, students might learn and appreciate these kind of entertaining local variations and learn about speech reductions or shortening words in the process. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily, that's a good question, Aaliyah. Is it okay if non-native speakers say it? I think that non-native speakers could say it as kind of a joke to show that they have this cultural understanding, but most people would wonder what city you were referring to. One thing that this is helpful for students, though, is one reason this is helpful for students is that if they ever do meet a local, then they refer to their city as Fluffia, they would understand, right? So audiobooks support our readers' kind of cultural understanding, their fluent reading, and they also support our readers' development of expressive reading, and therefore pronunciation. By noticing the natural stress and intonation patterns that readers use to tell stories, our learners can begin to improve their own rhythm. And one way they can do this is by shadowing a reader on an audio recording for pronunciation practice. And in that way, I mean they're reading aloud, repeating what the voice actor says with just a second delay, focusing especially on matching intonation and word stress. And students might notice patterns in sentence rhythm when they're doing this that they can adopt in their own speech. And if they do this frequently enough, they will probably begin to adapt some of these super segmental aspects of pronunciation. That means things beyond the sounds, but things like rhythm, stress, intonation. By doing this frequently, they can start to just adapt that naturally without thinking too hard about it. Some of you guys now might be wondering how all of this focus on pronunciation affects our reading comprehension, right? Well, it's true. Sometimes when we focus so hard on what we're saying or on individual words or sounds, we lose track of the main idea and maybe our ability to comprehend the story. So it's a good idea to give students someone else to listen to from time to time, maybe instead of having them read aloud by themselves. And of course, we should always check for their global understanding of the text if we're using the text for reading practice first and foremost. So regardless of whether you're reading or listening to it, if you want the students to understand the story and not be focusing more on pronunciation, then you need to check for understanding. So we're almost getting to the stage in the webinar where we'll look at specific activities designed to facilitate this. But first, we should learn a little something about the content that we'll be working with. So let's talk about O. Henry. Who was he? Why should our readers be interested in his writing? Let's go to the polls and find out what you already know about O. Henry. Okay. Which facts are true about O. Henry? His real name is Samuel Clemens. He adopted the pen name O. Henry when he was in jail. He wrote over 800 short stories and 2 novels. He once ran for president of the U.S. Okay, so I see most people believe his real name is Samuel Clemens. So you agree that he has a pen name, a pseudonym or a pen name, but maybe not that he adopted it while he was in jail. Many of you think he was very prolific, meaning that he wrote a lot of short stories and also some novels. Okay, good guesses. Let's go back to the presentation and I'll tell you what's what. Okay, the only fact that was true about O. Henry was that he became O. Henry in jail. O. Henry was his pseudonym, but Samuel Clemens was Mark Twain's real name. So Mark Twain was the pen name for Samuel Clemens, not O. Henry. O. Henry was the pen name for William Sidney Porter. This is William Sidney Porter, or O. Henry. He was born in North Carolina, spent a lot of his life in Austin, Texas, and just over 3 years in jail in Columbus, Ohio. He was accused or convicted of embezzling funds. That means stealing money from the bank where he worked. But he was released from prison early for good behavior, and he went on to really develop his writing career in New York City. So he's a good example of someone who has been able to kind of turn his life around, right? He actually wrote about 600 short stories in total, so he was still really prolific. Many of them were set in New York City, but he never managed to write a novel. O. Henry was known for being really funny, his wit, his sense of humor. Sometimes his sense of humor tended to be kind of grim or maybe a little bit pessimistic, not optimistic, not positive about the future, or ironic, meaning kind of unexpected. So he actually included a lot of unexpected endings in his stories. Maybe you noticed some of those already. He didn't write the short stories all in jail, actually. He began writing in jail, but he wrote most of them after he left jail. So that's just to answer your question, the one question that I see in there. So he also is really good with wordplay, meaning kind of making jokes out of the way he uses words. So I'm going to share with you a few quotes by O. Henry, and I wonder if you had to describe him based on the messages here, what adjectives would you use? So he says, when one loves one art, no service seems too hard. That means when you love what you do, when you love your job or your craft, nothing related to that craft seems really difficult, right? Okay, so maybe he's passionate, okay? We can't buy 1 minute of time with cash. If we could, rich people would live longer. What do you think? How would you describe him based on this quote? We can't buy 1 minute of time with cash. If we could, rich people would live longer. I think that he's maybe kind of idealistic, and that maybe, yeah, I think idealistic is a good way to describe it, and that he really values time. Maybe he believes that time is the most valuable resource that we have. He also says the true adventurer goes forth aimless and uncalculating to meet and greet unknown fate. Well, what does that mean? Well, aimless meaning without a goal, uncalculating meaning without kind of planning, to meet and greet the unknown, right? Whatever happens, happens. So maybe he's realistic, maybe he's passionate, maybe he's idealistic, he can be kind of sarcastic, he's adventurous. Okay, let's look at one more. Life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. So what does this mean? To sob means to cry really, really hard. To sniffle, that might be what you're doing when you're crying maybe not so hard. You're just kind of weeping a little bit. And smiles is obviously the opposite, but he says sniffles are predominating. So maybe he's saying that there are some difficulties. Life is made up of primarily manageable or mild difficulties. What adjective would you use to describe him? Okay, maybe he's realistic. Maybe he's realistic. Okay, interesting. So I think by sharing quotes like these with students, you could do this activity with your students. Obviously, some of these quotes are a little bit difficult for language learners, not yet at the advanced stages. But by sharing quotes like this with your students and having them kind of think about the author, they might get some ideas about the kinds of stories that he's going to write. And that can make them more focused as listeners or readers when they start to work with the story. So lucky for us, the Office of English Language Programs created Simplified Reader so that a wider audience of students can enjoy O. Henry's stories and they don't have to understand all of the difficult vocabulary in these quotes. Many of you on the Ning were asking about how to find these stories. So I just want to walk you through that process really quickly here. The easiest way is if you type the address seen here. So I know that that's a little bit difficult to read. So if you go to the Ning, you'll be able to see that link also. And thank you, Heather, for typing that in there also. So this is the link, and hopefully you've already visited this site. If you scroll down this page a little, you move down the page, you can see that the text is available in PDF and ebook. If you have a Kindle, you're in luck. You have the book here for your Kindle. You can download that. If you scroll down or move down the page a little further, you can see the table of contents for the book. And then by clicking the plus sign that I've circled in red, you can see all of the materials that are available for the particular short story that you've chosen. And before I move on to that part, I want to just show you above the table of contents, maybe you see the speech bubble and the word submit a classroom's idea for this resource. that means we would really like, the Office of English Language Programs would really like for you to share some of your own ideas for using these short stories. So by clicking there, you can share with the folks at the Office of English Language Programs what you've been doing. So let's click on that plus sign, and you will see how to find the audio version of the story. You can just click that orange text and download the MP3, and you'll need a software like Windows Media Player or iTunes to play the MP3. You can download it and put it on your iPod or another MP3 player. You can also you can load it onto your phone. And remember that this is the free, portable version of the text that your students might want to enjoy on their own time. And you can access this audio format as well on the mobile app from American English. And here is the website. It's at the top of the screen there where you can learn more. So check for the audiobooks icon in the top right corner. Why don't you raise your hand if you have used the mobile app before. Raise your hand if you have used the mobile app before. I see lots of hands raised right now. Lots and lots of hands are raised right now. So I hope that you have tried the mobile app before. You can see there are lots of other resources available here too, like the ebooks, the text version, Voice of America News, music, some of the songs maybe that you heard at the beginning of the webinar. I'm not sure, Heather or Jenny, if those songs are available on the mobile app. But yeah, that's a great source for some music that you can use with your classes too. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so some of the songs that you heard at the beginning of the webinar that you were commenting on are available on this app. But let's get back to the idea of O. Henry. And back on the website, here's where you can find the classroom activities. There's also an answer key for more support, so don't forget to download that as well. All right, so here we go. Now we're finally ready to look at the materials and how you can use them. Oh, hold on a second. First of all, we have a little pop quiz. I need to see if you did your homework. So let's go to the polls, and I'm going to ask you to match the story to the synopsis. The synopsis means a synopsis is a very short summary of the plot or of the main ideas. So this is a story about Rudolph Steiner, a true adventurer who is always ready to try something different. Which one of these stories was about Rudolph Steiner? Let's see who did their homework. All right, we have only a few people answering so far, so I'm wondering if some of us were unable to download the materials before. But that's okay. We'll be able to talk a little bit about these stories as we go through the classroom activities here in a second. So actually, I'll tell you what, let's hold off. I'll give you the answers after you've done all three of the questions. So let's move to the next question. Let's move to the next question. This is a story about a homeless man who tries to get into prison in order to get free food and keep warm during the winter. Which one is this? Which one is this? He wants to go to prison so that he can keep warm during the winter. There might be a word in the title of this short story that is a really good hint if you're thinking about some of the concepts in the synopsis there. There's a word that is related to one of those. Okay, good. So I think I see some more accurate responses here. All right, let's move to the next one. Anyone have an idea which story is about a couple who are trying really hard? They're going to great lengths. They're doing as much as they can to they're doing everything they can to buy each other special Christmas presents. Which one? Okay, good, good. Everybody got that one. Just about everybody got that one right. That one's the gift of the Magi. Good. All right, so let's go back to the slides. The true adventurer, Rudolph Steiner, he was the main character in The Green Door, and the couple buying the Christmas presents are featured in The Gift of the Magi, so most of you got that one right. That's probably O. Henry's most widely read, widely loved story. And the man who wants to go to prison is the main character in the cop in the anthem. So the cop was the clue there. Cop means policeman. So anyone want to try and write a one-sentence summary of Two Thanksgiving Day Gentlemen, or From the Cabbie's Seat, a synopsis, a one-sentence summary? A few of us only read The Gift of the Magi. Okay, that's okay. Oh, by the way, the frog, the first option in your quiz, that was the frog, the jumping frog of Calaveras County. He was the star of Mark Twain's story, so that was a trick question. Anyway, we'll have a little more time to review these readings before talking about the activities we're exploring, but you'll get a lot more out of this webinar if you take the time to read or listen to the stories and look over the activities again afterwards. And remember, this webinar is being recorded, so you can always revisit this portion later if you haven't heard or read the stories yet. Okay, let's move on. And let's talk about these classroom activities. So the first thing that I always have students do when we're about to tackle a new text is to preview the reading. I really think that helping our students focus on good strategies for understanding the text is important. Not just testing their comprehension, but giving them strategies to improve their comprehension is important. And one way we can do this is by previewing a reading. So why might we do that? Why should we preview a reading? And what is previewing? Previewing means just skimming over the text really fast, looking at the title. Maybe there are some pictures and some captions, and you can look at those too. But just taking a quick look at the text to kind of see what it's about. So why is this? Yeah, it lets the students know what they want to know about the text. That's great, Aaliyah. It helps them predict and raise their schema or their background knowledge exactly. Good. It helps them contextualize the topic maybe based on their own experience or prior knowledge, and that can help them be more active readers when they actually begin reading the story. It might also be a way for them to decide if they want to read it or not. Good. So some of you are touching on that as well. Exactly. So why don't we do this ourselves? Let's preview one. I know not everybody had the chance to read everything, so I'm going to put up the first 2 pages only of The Gift of the Magi. And this timer here shows that you can only have 30 seconds to quickly skim over the first 2 pages. Okay? Don't worry. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to understand every word. You don't need to even understand the most important details. We just want you to get the gist. So when I show the pages, I want you not to stop. Don't open your dictionary. Just keep reading, even if you're not sure you understand. We just want to get the basic idea, okay? So you have 30 seconds. Ready, set, go. The gist is the main idea. Okay, you have about 20 seconds left. Okay, now don't worry, I know that not everybody was able to read everything, and I'm sorry that the font was maybe too small. I think if you could try this again, maybe after the webinar, looking at the actual PDF. It feels very fast, doesn't it? So I know that it feels really, really fast, and that it takes some training for our learners to get used to having such a quick amount of time to skim. But think about what you do in your own native language. If you pick up a book or you pick up a magazine and you're thinking about if you want to read it, do you start reading from the beginning and reading every single word very carefully? Or do you just kind of skim a little bit, read over the words very quickly, not read everything, and then figure out if you're interested, right? Try and get a main idea. That's the idea here. So it's okay. It's okay for you to give them such a short amount of time. We want to help them develop fast reading skills and strategies, right? So I have a quick check for you. Let's see how much we were able to gather in those 30 seconds. So maybe we're not sure of everything, but I wonder if you have an idea of who the characters are and what their relationship is. So I'm already seeing some names. So I'm seeing Della, it's a couple, Della and Jim. Exactly, they're a couple. Exactly, okay. What is the setting? And they're a married couple, right? What is the setting? Where is this taking place? That was maybe a little bit more difficult. Okay, I see in a room. Okay, yeah, maybe in an apartment or a house. Do we know which city? A city, exactly. A village. Okay, what do we know about O. Henry? Where do most of his stories set? That's right, New York, exactly. Okay, and what is the problem? What is the main problem here? What is the main problem that they have? They have their money. Money is a challenge. And what time of year is it? What time of year is it? That's another setting question. It's Christmas time, and they don't have money, and they want to buy each other gifts. So even in those 30 seconds, hopefully you could get the answer to those main idea questions. And that's going to help your understanding of the details later. Okay, let's move to the polls so we can think about which students could work well with this story. Let's go to the polls so that you can talk about the students that could benefit from reading this story. Okay, next poll. I know the webinar is slowing down a little bit, so it might take a minute to bring the polls up, so I appreciate your patience. Okay, so which student group is this short story appropriate for? Which student group is this particular short story appropriate for? Sorry, the wording of the question is not quite accurate. I'm talking about the gift of Magi specifically here. Okay, so it looks like most of us think that secondary level students, high school students would be most well suited for this story. Okay, anybody think? I see most of us don't believe that this would be right for students in the primary levels, and I think I agree with that. Maybe it's more adult oriented. So I think that anybody beyond 6th grade could probably appreciate this story. All right, at least the theme of this story, the themes of the story. Let's think about their level, though. Let's move on to the next poll. And again, I'm talking about the gift of the Magi in particular. What language proficiency level do learners need in order to learn effectively from this particular short story? Okay, I'm seeing intermediate low, intermediate mid. If you think about some of the vocabulary words that were in the story and the way it was simplified, I think you guys are right on target. I think an intermediate level learner would do really well with this. I think advanced learners could also benefit, but you might have them focus on different things. You might have them focus on the more complex literary elements and less on the language. But yes, I do think that intermediate level students would be good for this. All right, let's move on now to really look at some activities that are available on the American English website. At americanenglish.state.gov, you'll find that many of the stories in the O. Henry collection are accompanied by pre-reading, while reading, and post-reading activities. And for the gift of the Magi, we can check out some pre-reading activities. So here's one that is really useful for students to activate their background knowledge or their schema, as I saw someone mentioning earlier. By thinking about what they already know about the subject matter that the story deals with, they can start recalling vocabulary around the topic, making predictions about what the story will be about, and then become more focused when they begin reading. So this will help them be more active readers. So the theme that is chosen to be examined here is the idea of gift giving. In this activity, the students are thinking about their own experience as gift receivers and their thoughts about what makes a gift valuable. Good, so that's the topic that they're kind of going to be recalling their background knowledge around. Here, the students are making a connection between the subject matter and themselves, which helps make the story more meaningful and interesting. I know that earlier in the webinar, someone said that short stories can be relatable, and here's a way that we're helping our students relate to this text. So I know it might be a little bit hard to read, so the directions here are that the students fill in the orange box with the name of a valuable gift that he or she received. And the gifts can be valuable in many ways. It doesn't have to be related to money or how much they cost. And then on the first kind of continuum line, we see not expensive, very expensive. The student marks whether the gift was expensive or not. And then on the next line, how meaningful it was. And it could be anywhere on that scale. In the third, in the blanks at the bottom of the page, the student writes what it kind of explains the reasoning for where they placed this gift on those two kind of continuums or scales. So the example here is that a scarf from this student's mother was not expensive but very meaningful because the yarn didn't cost a lot, but the student's mother stayed up really late to make the scarf. So I think that's a great way to kind of illustrate or to draw connections between our students' experience and the story. And on the next page, students can do this with two gifts that they've received. But I think you could modify this activity to make it more interactive. And the way you could do that is to cut the worksheet into strips. So if you have access to a printer and you're able to make copies and cut them into strips so that each student gets one of these little strips of paper, A, it will save paper and print or ink, and B, it will help us make it more interactive. You can also have students draw this on their own papers, that you don't have to necessarily have a copy of this handout, right? So Heather thinks you can also have students make their own strips. So give each student one strip and have the students only fill out questions 1 and 2. And I would recommend having them do this anonymously, meaning without writing their name. And then you, as the teacher, would collect everyone's answers and redistribute them to someone else. The student's job is to circulate and search for the classmate whose paper they were given. And when they find their partner, they have to ask their partner why it was inexpensive or not, or why it was meaningful, and write the answer in line 3. And afterwards, they report to the class about what they learned from their partner. So here are my answers. I might have drawn a picture of my bicycle with my bicycle bell, my ladybug bicycle bell, and I would have marked it as not expensive and very meaningful. And so if you were given this strip of paper, your job would be to find me and find out why this gift was not expensive and why it was very meaningful. So the answer that I would give you is that the bicycle and the ladybug bell were given to me by a friend who traded with a neighbor. It was free. He didn't spend money on it. He traded with a neighbor to get the bike. And the bell cost just a few bucks. So it was not expensive, but the gift was really meaningful because I used the bike to get to work every day. And my nickname is Goldbug, so the bell has special meaning to me. So I would explain this to my partner, and maybe my partner would take notes and then later share what I told them with the class or with a smaller group. So this is a way to get your students really talking and keep them from spending too much time looking at their notebooks. And you can hear them using the vocabulary around the topic and give them a little bit of more feedback. So that was really fun, I think. And let's check some more pre-reading material. And I think, so we looked at one for activating background knowledge, and each of these stories is accompanied by vocab activities, too, that we can use to prepare students for words that might be new to them. And for any of you who participated in the most recent webinar, you might recognize this. What is this? This is a word square. And in this activity, students are creating a study guide to help them remember important words. So one of the reasons why I chose to share this idea with you again, even though you saw it in the last webinar, is to kind of emphasize the idea that students really enjoy and can sometimes benefit from routine, right? And you can also help them develop good study strategies and recycle the same processes and help them learn to be good self-studiers by using some of these same activities multiple times. So I wonder if you can remember what some of these, or what some of the benefits of using a word square might be. Maybe you can remember some of these from the previous webinar. Okay, so it helps them learn the words without direct translation. Okay, you can, that's true. So the second, on the second row, the box on the left says translate the word into your native language, and that's actually a really interesting question for us to maybe discuss on the NING, is whether it makes sense to have the students use their own translation. There's a lot of debate in the field around whether we should have students use that translation. I think for some students, if there is a really good direct translation, that it can be really beneficial, especially for people who need to have an audio association. They can say the two words together in their minds and remember the meaning more easily. Also, the picture is really great for kinesthetic learners. It helps them remember their new words by asking them to draw a symbol or picture. It's good for visual learners. And the context from the sentence is helpful to illustrate the meaning of the word. So translations can be helpful also. And students can use word squares like this anytime to study on their own. They can fold them along these dotted lines and quiz themselves by only looking at one square at a time. So if the words are kind of high frequency, it makes sense for the students to first understand them before they read the story, and then return to the word squares later in their study to continue to practice them. So even though we want our students to understand these before they read the story, these are high frequency words. Horse, cab, depending on your context, right? A horse in the country, a cab in the city, a fare in the city. Anyone who takes a taxi would probably want to use those words. So having the students do some self-study with these word squares is useful. It can help students remember the words longer, that's right. All right. Based on the target words here, we have horse, cab, fare, hole, roll, pull. Which level do you think this story might be appropriate for? Would you say novice, intermediate, advanced? Which would you say? Novice, intermediate, advanced? What do you think? Okay, I'm seeing intermediate. Some people are saying novice. I think it depends a little bit on I don't know, your context, because some of these words might be more common in your context. If you live in a rural area, things like hole, roll, pull, horse might be more frequently used. So even though these words might be more or less frequently used in general in English, I think the context where your students are can also help them, or can also determine whether you think what level you think the target words are appropriate for. Okay, so I have another question for you, and I'm going to ask you just to consider this one for a second. Is it better? We can go to a poll for this one. Let's go to a poll for this next question. I'm going to ask you about the using the word in a sentence. So on their word square, the students have a blank where they use the word in a sentence. And my question for you is, rather than writing their own original sentences, is it better for students to write example sentences from dictionaries or their own words? So this sentence here is saying they should write the example sentences that come from a dictionary on their vocab study card. I see most of us say true. Not everybody, though. Some people are saying false. So I'm curious to know what your reasons might be. This is a question that I've kind of had to struggle with a little bit as a teacher, because I want to give my students as much practice as possible writing their own sentences with their target vocabulary. But I would say if you're using the word square as a study guide, then it would be more beneficial in my mind to have them use a dictionary sentence, because in that way you're ensuring that they're studying a sentence where the word has been used appropriately, and often the dictionary sentences contain really useful examples that help our students understand things even better. If you're using the word square as an assessment, you want to use the word square as a quiz, as a kind of a question on a quiz, then of course they would write their own sentence, right? So that's just something for you to consider. You can use the word square for either purpose to help students study or then to quiz them later. All right, let's go back to the slides. And I want to move on now to the while reading activities. Once you've gotten students thinking about the subject and the vocabulary to describe it, you can have them start reading or listening to the story. And the while reading activities that you can get at American English, it can help you and your students explore how the plot and the characters develop throughout the story. So let's look at plot development first. Here is an activity to supplement the cop and the anthem. Remember, this is the story about the homeless man who wants to go to prison, believe it or not. Remember some of this irony or grim kind of sense of humor of O. Henry. He wants to go to prison where it is warm and where he can be fed. So in this activity, students are exploring the setup, the problem, the conflict, and the resolution that are part of most narratives. This is one of those things that, or the concepts that we can have our students begin exploring in short stories, and then later in our course, maybe they could start looking at these ideas as they're illustrated in a novel. So this is a way to help them make that jump. You can introduce this activity. I'm a big fan of cutting up handouts or making my own signs with elements that I've taken from a handout, or papers, giving students papers and having them write what's on the handout. I would suggest here that having either posters with these 4 squares on them, or cutting up the handout and distributing them to groups of students, and having them kind of rearrange the paper. So you could cut out these 4 elements, mix them up, put the students in a group or partnership, and have them arrange the papers to guess in which order they fall. And in that way, they can understand the story structure. They can begin to understand the general story structure, and they can then move on to make a map to explore the plot and to summarize the plot. So on the next page, you can see that this activity might lend itself well to groups of 3. The first answer is already given. The setup is already explained to kind of help students to scaffold their learning, but there are 3 more elements that need to be described. So each group member, if you put them in groups of 3, could be responsible for identifying one of the remaining story elements and explaining it to his or her group. And if you want to find out how to fill out this story map, you either have to go read the story and try it for yourself, or you can check the answer key that's available on the website. And I noticed that I'm not sure where it's already moved up in the chat box, so I can't find your name, but I noticed that one of the participants has mentioned that this would be difficult for beginners. And I think that could be true. It might be, especially with this story, better to use this with more intermediate or advanced level learners. And if you think about the content of the story, it's probably more appropriate for older learners as well, who tend to be more advanced. Not always, right? But sometimes. All right, so let's move on then to explore another while reading activity. And this time we're going to look at the concept of character development, which our students can explore while reading or listening. In the cop and the anthem, the main character undergoes a big change. We just looked at the cop and the anthem, and I would really suggest reading it. It's pretty interesting. The main character undergoes a really big change, but in other stories, the character's qualities are kind of defined for us as the story progresses, as it goes on. So as an example, we can look at The Green Door next. And remember, this is a story about Rudolph Steiner. Rudolph Steiner is a lover of romance and adventure. At the beginning of the story, the narrator describes the difference between true adventurers and cautious people who prefer to avoid risks. And in this activity, students are asked to find the character descriptions in the story and match them to the person they describe, either the true adventurer or the cautious person. So there are some character descriptions summarized in the box, A through H, and the students can write the word, or write the letter of the description next to either the true adventurer or the cautious person. So they look for ways that the qualities are, next, they look for ways that the qualities are illustrated in Rudolf Steiner. So what specific examples in the text do you recall? I don't know if you can remember any. I think this was the one that the least people answered correctly in our pop quiz. So if you need to, if you're not sure, you'll just have to read the story. But after you read or listen, this could be extended into an activity where students discuss whether they themselves are true adventurers or cautious individuals, and how they fill out this, and think about how they would fill out this chart for themselves. Another idea would be for students to choose famous people, maybe write 4 sentences to describe them, and then their classmates have to guess who the celebrity is and whether that person is a true adventurer or a cautious person. And this can help students make connections between the text and the world, which can help make their reading more memorable. And it also is some group work, a little bit more interactive. I noticed, Sia, I'm sorry if I'm going to mispronounce your name, we had a participant from Indonesia who asked, in the while reading activities, how do the students record the meaning? So maybe what I would say is to use these activities, you could have the students complete them as they're reading to actually take a break and fill out their answers as they're reading, or you could have them preview the question and the task before they begin reading. And this time they're reading more slowly. They're not doing the previewing. They're slowing down a bit. They might, once they finish the story, go back and reread certain points to answer the question. So they have the task in mind while they're reading. It's helping them focus on the reading and specific elements that we want them to look at very closely, and then they can fill in the chart. So I noticed one of you just mentioned, what about slow and fast readers? Well, one thing you can do is have readers take turns to give each other a little bit of a chance and a little bit of a break. One reader reads until answer number 1 is discovered, and then the next reader reads until answer number 2 is discovered, meaning the students are reading aloud to each other. One student is reading, the other student is listening, and vice versa. So that way reading becomes interactive, and student talk time is increased too. Okay, let's move on to the next part. An extension of this activity is also available on the website. In this extension, the students can complete this while the story kind of unfolds. And it involves making predictions about what Rudolph will do next based on what they know about his character. So you could choose to do one or both of these activities with students, or you could have half the class do one and half the class do the other activity, depending on their level. So this one seems like it might be a little bit more suited for lower level learners than the previous one, because some of the answers are actually, they aren't asked to necessarily summarize things, but they're asked to think about what's happening and to make a prediction. So in this activity, students can take turns making predictions and explaining why to their partners. And if you're using the text version, one student could read aloud while the other listens and makes a prediction, kind of like what we suggested for the previous one. Right? So if some students read a little slower and other students read a little faster, then pairing them this way can help kind of balance out the time, and everybody might finish more around the same time. All right, so once everybody has read the story, making sure that your learners understand the main idea and the most important details is essential. We talked about that earlier. So on the American English website, you can also find some activities for generally checking their comprehension. A sequence chart is one way to do this. So here, after reading 2 Thanksgiving Day Gentlemen, which is about 2 gentlemen who share a Thanksgiving together, and you would not expect these 2 people to want to share Thanksgiving together. Remember, the element of the unexpected is important in O. Henry's stories. So in 2 Thanksgiving Day Gentlemen, afterwards the students can complete this sequence chart. And in this activity, they number the events in the story in the order in which they occurred. So depending on the level of your learners, you might actually give them this handout before they read and ask them to predict the sequence of events. They can check their answers after they read, too. So having their prediction in mind might help them be more active readers. And of course, I'm going to suggest again, we could get our learners out of their seats for this activity. So you can either cut up the handout, this worksheet, or you could have students write these sentences on a strip of paper, or you could have you could write them on your own strip of paper if you don't have access to a printer. And you only need one copy for every group of 7. So if you can cut out the events, I think that might be the easiest thing. Put the students in groups of 7 and give each student one event. And you can even tape the events to the students' backs. You use a little piece of tape and put it on the paper, and then stick the paper to your students' backs. And that makes this activity a little more entertaining. So once everyone has been assigned an event or it's taped to their backs, the students work in their groups to arrange themselves in the order in which the events occurred. Afterwards, each member in the first group that finishes successfully can read their assigned events aloud to the class to kind of retell the story in order, and then the other groups would listen and check their answers. And everyone in the winning team should get an O. Henry candy bar, right? I don't know if you're familiar with this candy, if it's available in your country, but this is a popular candy in the U.S. called O. Henry. It's a little bit different spelling, right? But it's milk chocolate and caramel, and it's really tasty. So if you have access, this is kind of a fun way to reward our students for their good work. Anyway, there are many more pre-reading, while reading, and post-reading activities that you can explore on americanenglish.state.gov. And I definitely would encourage you to come up with some of your own ideas too. But before I go, I want to share one of the ways I like to have students respond to readings in class. And that is through some debate and discussion. So what is our goal when we have students work through a reading activity? And what is our goal specifically when we're working with something like a short story or a novel? I mean, I think that the goal in this case is for our learners to enjoy reading, maybe to remember what they've read because it's meaningful to them, maybe to be able to apply what they've read in future contexts for a deeper, more critical thinking as they move through their lives as students or beyond that. And research shows that helping readers connect with the text in several ways can help them connect with this goal. So their knowledge is expanded and reinforced when they can make these 3 kinds of connections. Text-to-text connections help them. And their reading becomes more meaningful when they can see their own experience reflected in what they read, text-to-self connections. And when they can make connections to their experiences or knowledge of the wider world, their new reading makes more sense. So we also want them to try and make text-to-world connections. And how do we help our students make these kinds of connections? It's by asking the right questions. So I'm providing you here with some samples, a few question templates that you can use to create your own discussion and debate questions around any story or text. And when I have students discuss these questions, I usually put them in small groups, and I'll talk a little bit more in a second about ways to balance participation in those groups. Another thing I sometimes do is have students complete these questions for themselves. So the first question, what would you do if you were blank and why? They can pick a character from the story, any character. What would you do if you were the cop and why? What would you do if you were the homeless man and why? What would you do if you were Della and why? What would you do if you were Jim and why? The student could choose which character they want to discuss. Who does the character remind you of and why? So these 2 first questions help our students make text-to-self connections to help make it more meaningful, to help them think more critically about what they're reading and to interact with the text a little bit more. The third question, we recently read blank. What were some of the similarities and differences between those stories? Which story did you like better and why? This is a great question for text-to-text connection. Students, having the synthesis ability, when that means connecting text, connecting ideas across text to help them form more more complex conclusions and more well-informed ideas is really one of our goals for reading. So you can have the students complete this question. We can fill in the blank with any story or anything that they just read, as long as they can discuss the similarities and differences and explain which one they liked better and why. The fourth question, the issue of blank can be seen in our society today. Do you think the characters dealt with the issue effectively? Or you could say, do you think the author dealt with this issue effectively? What do you think is the best way to address it and why? So in this sentence, this one might be the most difficult for students to complete or to discuss. It's a text-to-world question. It requires lots of vocabulary that might not have been used in the text. But you could have your students pick a theme from the book and fill it in. So what would be the right way to fill in the blank for the gift of the Magi? What theme? The issue of blank can be seen in our society today. Well, maybe the issue of materialism, right? If people are going out of their way to buy material gifts when the thing that is really important is the love, I think that the idea of materialism is kind of being criticized in that story. Someone who is materialistic values material goods very highly. So you could have your students discuss that. You could also have them, consumerism, great, or self-centeredness could be a good theme to discuss. What about the cop in the anthem? Remember, the homeless man wants to go to jail? Maybe they could talk about the issue of homelessness and how it shows up in society today, and whether the characters dealt with the issue effectively, or the author, whether the outcome of the story is really realistic and why. Knowing what students know about the world today, they can discuss that. So these questions really help our students make the kinds of connections that we want them to make so that the reading becomes more engaging, more meaningful, and so on. So I mentioned earlier that I put students in groups for these activities, and I think that it's really effective to try and balance participation by assigning each of the group members a role. So I create some little cards to hand out to students, but you can also have these just displayed on the chalkboard or displayed on posters around your classroom. The cards don't have to be anonymous, although that can kind of be fun. But each of these cards kind of defines a role for the student. So one student would be the agreeable one and agrees as frequently as possible with the person on the right. And another student could be a disagreeable one and disagree as frequently as possible with the person on their right. So obviously this would be larger than a partnership, maybe 3 or 4 students in this group. And the students here also are given practice to work with phrases for agreeing and disagreeing that maybe you're practicing in your class. These are some simple ones that your students could practice, but you could make them more challenging or even simpler. You could just say yes and no. I disagree, I agree. You could limit what you want them to discuss. And then 2 other group members could be called the discussion leader and the recorder. And the discussion leader kind of leads the participation and leads the flow of the discussion by choosing a question, maybe filling in the blanks in the question, ensuring that everyone participates, including this other person, the recorder. And the discussion leader also has to share his or her opinion too, to make sure that this is a really active discussion. The recorder might be a student who needs some more listening practice or tends to dominate discussions. If you need to give that student something else to do to kind of allow others to speak a little bit more, then you can make that person the recorder. And the recorder will check and create a tally of the number of times the classmates use the phrases that are being studied. But the discussion leader also is going to be asking the recorder to share his or her opinion from time to time. So this is a way to kind of balance the talk time in your groups and to help with multi-level discussions, and because if the students are given a role, then it's a little bit easier for them to participate, and maybe the discussion leader might be one of the more advanced speakers in this group. So This is good for students who are for multi-level classes. Okay. Oh, and remember the winning group. If you could make this into a competition, right? So you could have each group kind of tallying their agreeing and disagreeing, how much they use those phrases, and then the winning group, of course, gets a box of O. Henry candy bars. All right. So I think that again, any way we can motivate our students, maybe with a little bit of competition, is really great. So anyway, that does it for what I wanted to share with you in our webinar today. But I'm really interested in taking some of your questions now. I have some time that we can look at some of your questions. So let's see. What would you like to know? What ideas are coming to your mind? We have about 2 to 3 minutes for some questions. I would love to give you a chocolate conchita. I don't know if you can get those in Mexico. I hope you can. Let's see. So what questions? Anything about the pre-reading or the post-reading or the while reading activities? I see Elena from Bolivian asks, is the explanation of how to use this card on the website? It is on. This will be in the webinar recording, which you can find on the Ning. So it's not on the American English website. It is not posted with O. Henry, but it is posted on the Ning, and so you'll be able to return to this this PowerPoint on the Ning. You can download the slides, and you can also download the pre-recording. I will send you all a virtual O. Henry candy bar. You can maybe I'll see if I can find an O. Henry candy on the Ning to put on your page. Okay, what other questions do you have? Activities with audio CDs. Maybe Mohammed from Bahrain, maybe you mean the audiobooks. So each of these activities can be used with the audiobooks, or they can be used with the textbooks, the text format. And I will also put on the Ning a list of resources, a list of websites where you can find more audio materials, more short stories that you can use in text and audio as well. There's also a link where you can learn more about O. Henry. Oksana says, how up-to-date is O. Henry's language to the modern language? Are there any points we should have in mind? Well, I think that that's a really good question. O. Henry's language in the original versions is a bit old-fashioned, but that's not to say our students can't benefit from understanding the story and working with the story. The simplified readers are maybe a little bit more up-to-date in terms of the vocabulary that is chosen. So by using the collection on the American English website, you can avoid some of that kind of confusion that could arise. And also the vocabulary words that are defined in the pre-reading activities, if they're ever old-fashioned, that would be explained in the glossary or in the pre-reading activity. Do students have to read the stories before the class on their own? That's a great question, Alina. Actually, I think you could, from time to time, have students try to do that to kind of try to facilitate a little bit more independent reading. Maybe once they've done some of the pre-reading strategies with you and you feel that confident that they'll be able to do it on their own and you can trust them to do them on their own, then you could. It depends a little bit on the level of your students and the level of the text. How much assistance do you think they might need reading it? I think having some time for reading in class can be really beneficial. You can lead your students through previewing, skimming, scanning activities, and you can help them kind of be better time managers as readers. I don't know about you, but I find that my readers, if I send them off to do a short reading for homework, often they tell me that they spent hours and hours and hours to do it, and I don't want them to do that. I would like to kind of help them remember not to open their dictionary every word, and that they don't need to decode, meaning they don't need to understand every single word or every single idea, but just to try for general understanding, because that's what we generally do in our native language as readers. Okay, I'm going to answer one more question for you now, and then we'll wrap up. So let's see, one more question. Min Shan from Taiwan asks, when do you play the audio, before or after reading? And I would say you could play the audio while the students are reading, or you could play the audio instead of having the students read. I don't know that I would do them separately, before and after, chronologically like that. I'd be interested to hear some of your ideas about what the benefit of doing that would be. But I think having students read along while they're listening to the reading can help them to be more fluent readers and not to stop to open their dictionaries. Okay, so anyway, I think that will just about wrap up. That will just about do it for us today. I've really, really enjoyed working with you all today. I'm glad Orhan William Sidney Porter will be happy to know that you feel grateful for his story. So I really hope that you all will try out some of these materials in your class. And again, if you have any classroom ideas that come to your mind as you're working on these stories with your students, please do try and post them to the American English website. Remember, there is a link on the resource page where you can download